All right, let's dive into a topic that so many of us deal with, but, almost never talk about. And that's that weird feeling of guilt or shame that can pop up around sexual thoughts. It can feel really confusing, even isolating, but I promise understanding what's actually going on inside your own head can be a total game changer. So you might be asking yourself this exact question: why? Why does a simple thought, something that just appears in my mind out of nowhere, come loaded with this heavy feeling of shame or guilt? It's a really personal feeling, and it's one we're going to unpack together right now. And look, let's just get this out of the way right off the bat because it's the most important thing to hear. If you feel this way, it absolutely 100% does not mean there's anything wrong with you. Seriously, this is an incredibly common and fundamentally human experience.
So if it's so normal, where does that feeling even come from? Well, it turns out the source of this inner conflict is usually a pretty predictable clash between two very different systems that are constantly running inside your brain.
Okay, so think of it like this. On one side, you've got your instinct system. This thing is biological, it's automatic, it's just part of your human hardware. And its job is to produce all sorts of thoughts, including sexual ones. It's just what it does. But then, on the other side, you have the social or moral system. Now, this is the part of you that's been built up over your entire life by your family, your culture, your experiences. It's kind of like an internal rulebook for what feels right or acceptable. And you can probably guess what happens next, right? When those two systems don't agree, when the instinct system produces a thought that the social system's rulebook flags as unacceptable, your brain doesn't just ignore it. It sends up a flare. And that flare often shows up as guilt or shame. But try thinking of it less like a punishment and more like a warning signal. And the message behind that signal? It's basically your brain just saying, hey, this thought that just popped out from the instinct department, it doesn't quite line up with the rule book from the social department. That little flash of guilt is simply your brain flagging a mismatch. It's just a notification of a conflict. That's it. Now, this brings us to what is probably the most crucial, most empowering idea in this entire discussion. Seriously, getting this one concept can totally change your relationship with your own mind. And the idea is incredibly simple. A thought is not an action. Let me say that again. A thought is not an action. Having a thought, any thought, no matter how weird or unwanted, it doesn't define your character, it doesn't dictate your morality, and it definitely does not equal your intentions. It is just a thought, floating on by. In psychology, there's this great concept called mental noise. Think about it. The human mind is basically a thought-generating machine. It pumps out thousands of random, intrusive, strange, exaggerated thoughts every single day. And the vast majority of them, they're completely meaningless. They're just the brain's background static, like a radio playing between stations. So if the thoughts themselves are normal, where on earth does the shame come from? Well, it's learned. You weren't born with it. It often comes from all those external things that helped write that social rule book we talked about. Things like a really strict upbringing, powerful cultural taboos, a deep fear of what other people might think, or honestly, just a simple misunderstanding of how normal and diverse human desire really is. Okay, so we've kind of covered the why. Now let's get into the how. How can we start moving toward a healthier perspective on all this? Well, it's all about making a small but powerful shift, moving away from judging our thoughts and moving towards simply observing them. So here's a practical path forward, a little 3-step game plan. First, just start recognizing these thoughts as normal biological functions. They're like a sneeze or a hiccup. They just happen. Second, really get this. The guilt isn't in the thought itself. It only shows up when we grab onto that thought and attach a heavy meaning or a harsh judgment to it. And third, practice being an observer. Learn to just notice a thought, acknowledge it, like, there's a thought, and then just let it pass by without putting it on trial. So when you put this all together, what's the real twist here? There's a really powerful way to reframe this entire experience. So here it is. What that uncomfortable feeling of guilt feels like is proof that our thoughts are bad or that we are bad. But what that feeling actually is, it's just proof that your brain is working. It's doing the very human job of trying to square your natural instincts with all the rules it has learned over a lifetime. It's a sign of processing, not a sign of a problem. And that whole process, that internal negotiation between what we instinctively feel and what we've been taught to believe, that's a deeply, fundamentally human struggle. Trust me, you are not alone in this, not even close. So let me just leave you with this one last question to chew on. What if you could reframe that discomfort? What if it isn't a sign of some personal failure or shame at all? What if it's actually a sign of growth, a sign that you're becoming more aware of your own inner world and you're learning to navigate it with a little more kindness? What might change for you then?